Without context, numbers are useless. That's my biggest lesson from operations is like, there needs to be context. You need to understand what's happening. Before ops, I was a data analytics person, data scientist person. So I was just like, coding on Python and trying to figure out like, make sense of the numbers. What you realize after being in like, data analytics for some time is that the data analytics teams usually end up at the end of the day adding value to the business, but there is a chain of command, right? Like you make your analysis, you make your insights or reporting or whatever thing that you find, and you take it to the business stakeholder, and then you have to convince the marketing person, you have to convince the salesperson that, hey, I have an insight. I think this might be worth moving the business, and hence, like you should go ahead and apply this, and then see how things change, the process change. So that's when I got introduced into ops. Even without knowing myself, I was been trying to do a lot more of convincing than data analytics myself. That's when I realized, okay, so if you're seeing inefficiencies and you're able to map it out and like it, and then hey, is there a job that does that? And luckily, one of my managers at Freshworks who pulled me in and then said, "Hey, maybe you might be suited more for operations." And he pulled me into revenue operations. And this was back 4 years ago, where RevOps was still a very early function back then for the team. And that's when ops started for me. And yeah, if you think about how ops has changed my life, I think I can never look at numbers the same way I do anymore. Without context, numbers are useless. That's my biggest lesson from operations is like, there needs to be context. You need to understand what's happening. Just looking at numbers is not going to be helpful. And I've had a profound respect for salespeople, especially GTM people in marketing and sales after, because everyone has this negative connotation towards sales. And then I had the same mindset going into operations. And then you start working with salespeople every day. And then you realize their own set of challenges and how they have to work on solve for it. So it just a lot of changes happened in my life. A lot of good learnings from being an ops person.
That's awesome. And without context, data doesn't mean very much. I love that line. In RevOps, people talk so often about the interpersonal relationships and bringing departments together. Because you came from a background in data, I'm really interested to hear how you grew into that part of the role of RevOps and how that helps you add the context you mentioned.
Okay. So I think one of my, from a young age, I was good at social, just working with people, and I'm kind of an extrovert. So it was a little easy for me. I never thought that's going to be helpful because when you're a data scientist, you're just going to be coding on Python and R. You don't really get to interact with people. But once you went into ops, and then I see some of my peers that I work with ops, right? Like some of them are good at operations, some of them are good at technology, but a lot of insights about the business is in ground reality. It's in the reps. So whenever you want to understand how a region operates, hey, these are the people who are running the Latin American markets. You can look at their numbers. You can see how they have done their revenue numbers and how they have done the leads justice and so on. But that tells nothing to you unless you go talk to the salespeople and then you ask them. The amount of insights that you're going to get and the problems that you're going to show up are completely different. Like you might assume something is a problem, but you talk to them, it's going to be something else altogether. But it's not a scalable way to do that, right? Because there are going to be in my previous film, there's like 500 salespeople. So you're not going to get to talk to all of them, but you have to carve out those time. In a pre-COVID world, how I used to interact with people is to find them, take them for a coffee, talk to them, understand what their problems are, the region's problems are, how are things going, just build that rapport with them. And then you won't believe, people share things, people share their genuine problems, where they find, where they might need ops' help, where they think, we are not doing the right strategic decision. They share them. And with that insight, the amount of impact you can make to the business is much more nuanced and much more specific to the problems rather than a high level decision where we don't understand the problem, but we prescribe a solution regardless. So just talking to people, going there and building that rapport, that was my job for every new team that I've managed, every new region I've taken over. That has been my job for the first 3 months, where I'm just going to talk to people, build that relationship. And I need them to trust me and call me when something goes wrong. Hey, something is messed up. They need to call their operations person and let them know in advance so that I can predict that to the business leaders, right? So that I know that, hey, maybe this deal slipped through. I just got a call from the sales rep, so we may have to reduce our forecast for the quarter. So that level of trust, it's the most important thing in operations.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You mentioned trust. I want to bridge that into something similar, which is responsibility. And we're talking about having high level views here. So who does forecasting responsibility fall on ultimately?
So it's I would say something like my CRO used to say at one firm I used to work is basically sales leader is not responsible for the target or quota he's given by. He's measured on target or quota he's given by, but he's responsible only for his forecasting. If he's able to accurately forecast where he's going to land, then he has built a system where he is able to predict what his reps are going to do, and he's able to build a system where he knows which deals are going to close. So predicting where you're going to land is more important than doing your targets or quota. Even if you predict 50% and land 150%, it doesn't matter. You still you're not a good sales leader. You got lucky. So I would say in that way, a sales leader's most important job is to ensure he commits properly, he forecasts properly, and he does his job. And there's no other better partner to sales leaders than revenue operations in today's SaaS world. So it becomes RevOps one of the core mandates, right? Because if you think about RevOps' job, they are there only to accelerate the revenue. They are only to grow the business predominantly and ensure things run smoothly. And as part of growing the business is to building a predictable business, right? So building ability to forecast quarter over quarter, month over month with very less misses. The error rate cannot be more than 2 to 5% if you're looking at a very huge business. You can't have more than 2% of forecasting differences. So that automatically becomes the RevOps' main mandate, because if a sales leader is going to be responsible for it, then RevOps have to help them achieve that goal.
Great answer, appreciate it. Now you mentioned there, even if a sales leader overachieves, doesn't necessarily mean you're a great sales leader, you got lucky. Are you suggesting there then that if we can't predict our performance, there isn't a process and method about the outcome? Is that the conclusion of that?
Yes, see, if you're running a very small team of 5 people and if you overachieve numbers here and there, that's fine, because one swing deal can take your numbers vary somewhere else. But if you're running 100 sales team, right, there's no way in hell you're going to be able to manage everything. You have to have sub-level reportees, you have to have managers, you have to have leads who are going to manage the business at that complexity. And as a sales leader, you need to be able to figure out how exactly each of those teams are going to do. And you need to have a ballpark in your mind that says, hey, for this quarter, I'm going to be forecasting around 7 million, but there is around 500K to 800K worth of swing deals that might come through. But I would say 7 million is my bare minimum best case scenario that you can hold me accountable to. And if I get lucky, I might do 7.8 million. So that's the level of commitment a sales leader has to do. He can't commit 7 million, 7.8 million and land 10 million, because that doesn't make sense, right? Where did the 2.2 million come from? If you didn't know where it is coming, then next time what's going to happen, that 7 million is going to become 5 million, because you don't know where the 2.2 came from. Now you don't know where you lost the 2 million as well.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you. One interesting thing, particularly in tech, is how things change as companies grow and scale. So if we think about an early stage company, you can or you don't have to speak as much about where you're at now, it's okay. But an early stage company, perhaps before many of the processes are implemented, what's the job and what's the perspective of RevOps in a place like that with a forecasting process?
See, I would say RevOps is more like a middle stage company role. In an early stage company role, it's very difficult to just be RevOps. Pure RevOps doesn't exist unless there is 10 salespeople sitting there. There are enough pipeline that's happening, enough revenue that's happening. I would say in the SaaS world, I'll look at least $500 to $1 million is the minimum revenue at which you start hiring RevOps people and start going it. And during the early stages, it's all about setting up tools, processes, right? You have seen I know what are the complexities that comes when you grow and when you're at a very big stage. So at an early stage, what I'm focused on solving here is to solve for all the tech stack, get the best tech stack tools in place, so that as we scale, when the business grows, the tech stack is also able to grow. I wouldn't make a mistake of betting on a very new platform that may not scale with me tomorrow, because I know what the problem of having a non-scalable platform as a RevOps person, because as RevOps people, our biggest nightmare. So we want to do something, but our CRM doesn't do that, or our lead scoring tool doesn't allow us to do that. That breaks the system. So focus more on tech stack and also start putting processes together, right? Like a lot of companies right now, like, they have data security practices and they have, uh, if I have to say something on that front, you have your legal processes that you have to follow. You have to have proper auditing processes you have to follow. I think having done that in, bigger firms, it helps to start thinking about those at an early stage and start putting those together, but still not too early, not when you're not even $1 million.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a decision to make here about when the right time is, which is interesting because I've heard some RevOps people say tech comes in when the people and the processes are in place. But it sounds like what we might already conclude, whilst that might be a good idea, well, in some ways we need our tech first, because without the tech, we can't scale the processes. So it's quite an interesting, like, where do you come in at the right time? When do you know it's correct?
Correct. See, I think some of the basic tools, I don't think you can start a company and start doing everything without a proper CRM. If you have two salespeople, you have to have a CRM. So there are some techs which are non-negotiable, which comes before, the processes and systems. It comes first, but I don't think it applies to all of them. I think it's just subjective because some techs only work once you have cracked the market, once you have put up a process, and now you want to automate that process, you can get a tech to do that. But if you expect tech to solve you that learning journey where you figure out the process, right, that's not going to happen. So I think we have to distinguish between what kind of tech we're talking about.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I'm interested to hear. One of the things we talk about a lot on this community is the challenge of digging into that forecast. Like we were saying earlier, it has to mean something. So I'm interested to hear some crucial things you do in your day-to-day work to dig into and understand the forecast, whether that's looking at deals or speaking to managers. But how do you gain that deep understanding?
So I follow a specific practice for forecasting, which I experimented multiple times and then finally able to land it. And that's something that's scaled across my board, across other regions as well, and they follow. I'll just share my practice around how I think about forecasting. So basically, if you think about what the purpose of forecasting, like the main objective is CXOs have no visibility on to reality. Your CROs or VP of sales are not going to have full visibility into reality because there are managers, there are sub-level leads and FOD leads involved. So they need full truth to come into that. And the only way for you to get to full truth is to talk to the salespeople themselves. Like to be part of the forecasting meetings and talk to them and understand what are the deals that are showing in that numbers, right? Like if a small region is committing 50K or 100K in ARR for this month, where is it coming from? Who is going to be doing that number? Is there any swing deals or risks involved in that number, or is it a risk-free number where we already have customer commitment and customers are already there in advanced pipeline stages? So you need to be able to go through each deal level. You need to be able to track them and go through. But how do you do as RevOps, right? Like how do you scale this process? How do you do that? So that's where, if you look at genuine forecast meetings, right, a lot of times sales leaders just pick up deals and talk about that particular good set of 4 to 5 deals that they know are important, and then they'll just just move past the other deals, right? But as RevOps people, if you are involved in that process, you can't let that happen. So what I do is hey, every month we have a recurring meeting. So first week of the month we'll have to deliver forecasting. So by first or second, once the previous month's numbers closed, I'll set up a forecasting meeting, and along with the leader, we run that meeting. So you form a partnership with the leader and tell them what's the importance of getting that pipeline visibility in dashboards and reporting, why it is very important. So you send a reminder previous day asking every rep to update the CRM, clean out every junk thing that you have there and make it as update to real time as possible. And then you start looking into those numbers during the review meeting. You just look at numbers, review meetings can go wherever you want them to. It can all of a sudden go into one bad rep, and the meeting can end up about one bad deal. So you have to keep it focused. So you give a 1 hour slot. You set up in my previous organization, there were around 7 regions. So it was just 2 days. And every day we used to have 3 regions on day 1 and 4 regions on day 2. We used to set up a 1 hour meeting. And during that 1 hour meeting, we just review all the numbers. Hey, you tell me how much did you do last month? What's this month's target? What's your comment? What's the pipeline look like? Let's go through the pipeline. Let's look at that pipeline and get a sense of it. So now you do this every month beginning. And then once you do this process, you and both the sales leader and you will have some sense of what's happening. Now the sales leader have to give a comment to the management. the CXOs of your firm. So now what does a sales leader do? You want sales leader sit and you do that thing, right? Like all salespeople, like, there are going to be different kinds of forecasts. One guy sandbags. He just says, hey, like, this deal is not going to come. And then finally he's going to close that deal. And then there is one guy who's basically going to be like, hey, I'll definitely close it, definitely close it. There is intent, but reality doesn't usually turn up in his favor, like, so he's not going to close. So you need to add those variables for each region. The sales leader will have context of who's a reliable sales rep who can take commit at face value, and whose commit you need to be careful with, either increase or decrease it, so that you get that ideal number. So at the end of this exercise of 2 days, you sit for a couple of hours with your sales leader and you get the final forecasting of, hey, this is what the number that you're going to be able to land for sure. And this is what you might land if things go in your favor. And then you will have your best case scenario number where, hey, everything goes in your favor. What happens? So you get these two numbers, and now it gets interesting, right? Because sales leaders themselves, they have the same personality as the reps. They'll either sandbag or they'll either overcome it. So some sales reps will take the lowest number and commit that. Some sales leaders will take the highest one and then say, hey, I'm going to commit the best possible scenario due to some pressure or something. So that's where you bring the reality. Once you go into the CRO's office, and once your sales leader is committing what the number is, that process is done. But after that, the CRO is going to call RevOps and he's going to ask, where do you think the quarter is going to land? You're going to have to tell the truth. You're going to have to tell the best case number. You're going to have to tell what the medium number is. And you're going to have to tell, hey, this is what I think this team can actually do. You have to be honest there and give the ground reality. And if you're sitting in the castle, you wouldn't be able to do it. So you have to be part of those forecasting meeting. You have to understand which reps are overcommitting, undercommitting. And if you're able to get all this together, then making that forecasting accuracy to the CRO so that your CRO can make forecasting accurately to the CEOs. It's going to be very simple.
That's a fantastic approach. It sounds like we're combining there being a key business partner, but also quite directed with what ops has to know. I have a final question. If you're in a room with RevOps heroes, what would you ask them if you could ask one question?
I'll basically ask them, how do you prioritize? I want to understand, like, what is the strategy towards priority? Because if every RevOps guy I've worked with has a to-do list of 150 things, and there are 20 ambitious projects that will impact the company long term. So my question to them is, hey, what are the, like, how do you decide which long-term projects to focus on and which short-term projects or short-term problems to ignore, so that I'll be able to, like, prioritize better and be able to do more for the time that I have.